My mother-in-law poured something strange into my glass when she thought I wasn't paying attention. "A special cocktail for my dear son-in-law," she said, smiling as if nothing had happened. I smiled back, nodded in thanks, and quietly swapped my glass with her husband's, Charles, the man who constantly belittled my work. 45 minutes later, his face turned pale, sweat broke out on his forehead, and he bolted for the bathroom, the sound of vomiting echoing down the hallway of their luxurious home. No one knew what was going on, but I knew exactly. My name is Logan Bennett, 32 years old, a freelance photographer living and working in Boulder, Colorado. I built my career from the ground up: weddings, wildlife, magazine shoots, any job that could pay the bills, as long as I got to hold a camera. And I wasn't just good at it, I lived for it. But to my wife's family, especially her mother, Margaret Holloway, that job was never enough. "How's that little photography hobby of yours going?" Charles would ask at every Sunday dinner, sarcasm barely veiled beneath his polished manners. He was a financial investor, someone who measured success in square footage and rising stock. Tickers. Every dinner at their home felt like a psychological chess match. Margaret doted on her daughter, while Charles attacked me with questions about income, future plans, insurance, and assets. Each time, Rachel, my wife, would squeeze my hand under the table, a silent apology for the things she couldn't control. Just last week, I'd returned from a shoot of gray wolves in Glacier National Park, where nighttime temperatures dropped below 20 degrees and snow reached up to my knees. I hadn't even thawed my fingers properly when Rachel said, "We can't. Miss Mom's birthday party, just a few hours, love." I should have listened to that tight feeling in my chest right then. When Margaret pulled me aside into the kitchen and said, "I made a drink just for you," I knew something was off. The way she glanced around before handing it to me, the slight tremble in her hand, it was all unusual. That pale red cocktail had a thin, nearly invisible film on top, catching the light just so. I didn't know exactly what was going on, but my gut told me, "Don't drink it." "Let me help bring the drinks to the table," I said, picking up both glasses Margaret had prepared. Back at the dining room, Charles was on his phone, not even looking up when I set a glass in front of him. "Sangria for the father-in-law," I smiled, and I picked up a glass of water for myself. Then I waited. And when Charles started sweating, trembling and stumbling to his feet, I said nothing. I just watched. Margaret turned white. She knew. She knew exactly what had happened, and so did I. I didn't get angry. I didn't ask questions. I just kept eating my slice of chocolate cake, eyes fixed on her. While Rachel ran after her father, I quietly slipped the untouched cocktail, the one meant for me, into my camera bag. When we got home, Rachel was still worried about her father's condition. "Maybe it was seafood poisoning," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Margaret stammered an excuse about the scallops, saying she'd check their expiration date. I remained silent. That night, I placed the untouched glass into my lens case and texted an old friend, Jason Miller, once a photography client, now running an independent lab that specialized in testing food and pharmaceutical toxins. "Personal or professional?" he asked when I handed over the glass the next day. "Family," I replied. He nodded, asking no further questions. 3 days later, Jason called me back. "Logan," he said, "that glass contains benzodiazepines, strong sedatives, not lethal, but enough to knock out a healthy man for several hours and potentially cause short-term memory loss. Where did you get this?" I didn't answer, just asked him to send me the official report. That evening I intended to tell Rachel everything. But then I saw her curled up on the couch, exhausted after her shift at the environmental center, and swallowed the words. I needed more evidence. A single test result wouldn't be enough. I knew Margaret. She would deny it. Spin the story as if I were trying to drive a wedge through the family. Over the next 2 weeks, I quietly investigated. Through a friend from pharmacy school, I gained access to Margaret's prescription history. She was getting Xanax from 3 different doctors, overlapping prescriptions, a clear sign of abuse. I also heard strange stories from their neighborhood. Margaret once caused a scene at a community party, accusing someone of stealing her necklace, which she later found in her own handbag. At the golf club, there were rumors she'd lost control and screamed at a staff member for serving the wrong wine. I gathered everything, printed it out, and sealed it in an envelope. Then an opportunity came. One evening, Rachel said, "My mom wants to create a new LinkedIn profile to promote her charity foundation. She asked if you'd take her portrait." I was surprised, honestly. I nodded. "Sure, I'll go." That Saturday morning, I arrived at their villa with only a small camera bag and the envelope. Margaret wore a cream silk outfit, deep red lipstick, and neatly styled hair. "Charles is in the study," she said, smiling professionally. "Good," I said. "Before we start, there's something I think you should see." I handed her the envelope. She opened it, eyes scanning each line, and her hands began to tremble. "This is absurd," she whispered. "I never—" "We both know what happened," I cut in, voice calm. "What I don't understand is why." Margaret looked up, her eyes cold and sharp. "Because you're not good enough for my daughter. A real man provides stability, not wilderness pictures. And drugging my drink was your way of teaching me that lesson?" I asked. "Not to harm you," she said, her voice like a knife. "Just to make you miss that photo incident. So Rachel would start to realize you're unreliable." I was silent, but I understood. This was no longer just about her and me. This was a battle for control over her daughter, at any cost. I left the Holloway house that day without taking a single photo. Margaret stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes full of hatred. But I wasn't afraid. I no longer felt the need to stay silent. That night, Margaret called Rachel, sobbing into the phone, claiming I had threatened her during the shoot, that I was mentally unstable and needed help. Rachel confronted me the moment I walked in. I didn't dodge. I showed her everything, the toxicology report, the prescription records, even the old messages from Margaret, laced with insults I had never mentioned. Rachel held the report, her hands trembling slightly. "My mom would never do this," she said, but doubt flickered in her eyes. I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, "I know. You need to see it for yourself." In the days that followed, Rachel grew distant. She visited her parents often, came home late, eyes red. I buried myself in work, shooting all day in the studio, the only way I could stay sane. Then, one rainy afternoon early in the week, a package with no return address appeared at our doorstep. It was marked simply Logan, in unfamiliar, slanted handwriting. Inside was a USB drive and a small slip of paper with just a few words. "You need to see this. Jasmine, Brandon's wife, the one who always stayed silent, kept her distance." I plugged the USB into my laptop. It was footage from Margaret's home security camera. The first clip, her secretly pouring liquid into a wine, glass in the kitchen. The next, me walking in, picking up both glasses, placing the special one in front of Charles. And then, the harsh coughing, Margaret's scream, Charles's vomiting. But the most important part came after we left. The next segment of the video was recorded about 30 minutes after Rachel and I had left the Holloway residence. The frame shifted from the kitchen angle to the living room. Margaret was screaming at Charles, her voice shrill, stripped of all the usual elegance. "This is your fault," she shrieked. "I clearly told you not to touch that glass." Charles, still pale, responded in a hoarse voice, "I thought it was mine. You didn't mark anything." "This isn't the first time you've ruined everything," she yelled, stomping her foot. I spent a whole week planning this. Logan was supposed to miss that damn photo exhibit. Rachel would start to doubt him, and then... What? Charles cut in, eyes cold and sharp. You'd start telling her Logan's unreliable, that she should leave him like she did. That doctor guy. I stared at the screen, unblinking. For the first time, a clear clue about a past Rachel had never spoken of. And Charles, he knew everything. The next clip was from 2 days later, again in their living room. Charles and Margaret were arguing intensely. Charles sat on the couch, a glass of wine in hand, while Margaret stood with her arms crossed. He knows, Charles said. Logan. He knows everything. So what? Margaret shrugged. It's just his word. Rachel won't believe him. She'll choose her family. And if she doesn't? Charles asked. What if she does believe him? What if she leaves us? Margaret was silent for a moment, then exhaled sharply. I've already started talking to Rachel about marital issues. That Logan's been short-tempered lately, irresponsible. I'm planting the seed. Give it time. She'll think divorce was her own idea. I leaned back in my chair, hands trembling. This wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment scheme. This was a calculated system of control, executed in deliberate stages, and it wasn't just happening to me. I called Jasmine right away. She picked up on the first ring. Why? I asked. Why did you send this? Her voice was soft. Because they did the same thing to me. When I first married Brandon, Margaret told me flat out I wasn't good enough. Then she started probing, spreading rumors, driving wedges. It took me 2 years to hold my marriage together. Why didn't you say something sooner? I asked. Brandon worships his parents. He wouldn't believe me. I didn't want to lose him. But when I saw Rachel starting to doubt you, I couldn't stay quiet. I knew they were doing it again. I was silent for a long time. Then I made a decision. This time, I wouldn't play by their rules anymore. The next morning I received a message from Charles. We should talk. Just 2 men, no wives. I replied with a single word. Fine. We met at the Southridge Club, where Charles often entertained guests. The private room was quiet, bathed in warm, golden light. He poured himself a glass of bourbon, then looked at me over the rim, as if calculating my worth. Logan, he began, voice deep, family is complicated. Margaret may have gone too far, but she had her reasons. She's looking out for her daughter. Drugging my drink is her way of showing love? I asked. He waved his hand dismissively, as if brushing off a minor incident. It might have been a misunderstanding. She's on anti-anxiety meds, you know. Probably mixed things up. I have the video. The argument afterward, too, I said, eyes locked on his. Charles's expression changed instantly, colder, sharper. So, what do you want? He asked. Money? A sum to keep quiet? I let out a soft laugh. You think I married Rachel? For money? Don't pretend to be noble, he said, his tone lowering. Everyone has a price. I stood up, planting both hands on the table. I'm not here to bargain. I'm here to warn you. A warning? He repeated. Yes. Stop. Right now. No more planting doubt, no more division, no more trying to push Rachel to leave me. If you and Margaret keep interfering in our marriage, everything I have, video, emails, prescriptions, won't stay with me alone. He leaned back in his chair, silent. I leaned in, voice low and steady. I don't need your approval. I just need you to understand that this time, you're not in control anymore. And then I walked out of the room without looking back. I didn't tell Rachel about the meeting with Charles right away. Not because I was afraid she wouldn't believe me, but because I needed more. Not just evidence, but the truth about a past she'd never fully understood. That night, I called Lena Carter, Rachel's best friend from college. She answered after 3 rings. I need to ask about Andrew Foster, I said bluntly. Lena hesitated. That was a long time ago. But Rachel truly loved him, didn't she? Very much, she sighed. He was good to her, serious, respectful. But then things fell apart too fast. Rachel believed Andrew cheated on her, but I always had doubts. I stayed silent. Lena continued. At the time, Margaret told Rachel she had accidentally seen suspicious messages on Andrew's phone. Charles even hired a private investigator, but Andrew insisted it was a setup, that the messages were fabricated. Rachel didn't know who to believe, and then he disappeared from her life. I thanked Lena and reached out to Andrew. It took nearly an hour to convince him, but he finally agreed to send me old emails. Helpless, heartfelt apologies from a man pushed out of the life of the woman he loved. Reading those words, I saw a different version of myself. A man who had tried, who had been misunderstood, and who had been driven away by hands labeled family. I printed everything and added it to the evidence folder. With each piece, the full picture grew clearer. Margaret and Charles weren't just against me. They were against anyone who dared give Rachel the power to choose for herself. I had no more doubts. And this time, Rachel wouldn't just hear it from me. She would see it with her own eyes. I invited Brandon and Jasmine over for dinner on Saturday without telling Rachel in advance. When she walked into the dining room and saw us gathered around the table with the laptop already open, she frowned. "What's going on?" "Tonight," I said gently. "It isn't about arguing, just seeing everything." I hit play. No explanation. From the footage of Margaret spiking the drink to the moment Charles drank it and collapsed. Then the argument after dinner, the clip where Charles yelled, "This isn't the first time you've done this." Rachel's face froze, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair. I moved on to the later clips, where they plotted to divide us, to plant doubt in their daughter's mind. Brandon murmured, "No way. Not our parents." Jasmine placed a hand on his shoulder. "I tried to tell you. You didn't want to believe it." I said nothing more. I just brought up the emails from Andrew, followed by letters from Rachel's old friends, the ones who had disappeared from her life without reason, now confirming they'd had private talks with Margaret. When the screen went black, the room fell silent. Rachel looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I didn't want you to just take my word for it. I needed you to see for yourself who they are, and what they've done to the people you once trusted." Brandon stood up, angry. "All these videos, you edited them, didn't you? My mom would never—" "No, Brandon," Jasmine said. "They did it to me, too. It wasn't until I had James that they pretended to accept me. For the grandchild, not for me." Brandon slumped back into his seat, face pale. For the first time, he looked at his wife with different eyes, not with doubt, but with regret. That night, Rachel didn't say another word. We sat together on the balcony for a long time, the lights off, gazing at the dim silhouette of the distant mountains. The next morning, Margaret called. Rachel picked up and set it to speaker. "Sweetheart, I think you should come home for a few days. Your father and I are worried about you. Sometimes marriage needs a bit of distance to see things clearly." Rachel cut in. "I've seen the video." Silence. "What video, darling?" "The one where you drugged Logan's drink. The one where you and Dad discussed making me think divorce was my own decision." More silence. Then Margaret spoke, her voice colder. "That boy must have doctored it. He's always been jealous of our family." Rachel sighed. "We'll be coming over tonight, me, Logan, Brandon, and Jasmine. No more lies, no more division." After hanging up, Rachel turned to me. "They'll deny it. They'll attack you. They'll say you made it all up." I nodded. "I know. So, what's our plan?" I looked into her eyes. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. To show them the real me, not the obedient son-in-law, but the storyteller, with proof, a camera, and a plot they can't rewrite. That evening, we arrived at the Holloway residence right on time. Rachel wore a long coat, her hand gripping mine tightly as we stepped onto the familiar front steps. Brandon and Jasmine were all ready. There, sitting stiffly in the living room, Charles stood up when he saw me carrying a camera bag and tripod. "I thought this was supposed to be a family conversation," he said, narrowing his eyes. "Exactly," I replied, setting up the tripod. "And my family has a habit of recording important conversations, for memory's sake." Margaret emerged from the kitchen, her deep red lipstick perfectly applied, her hair in a tight bun. She froze when she saw the camera, then glanced at Rachel. "You're letting him drag you into this ridiculous stunt?" Rachel held her head high. "Tonight, you don't speak for me anymore. I'll listen, but you will too." I hit record. "Let's start with something simple," I said. "The birthday wine glass. What were you trying to do to me?" "Absurd," Margaret snapped. "He's fabricating everything, Charles." I played the video directly from my laptop, projected onto the large screen in the room. The footage was too clear to deny. Margaret pouring something into the glass, me switching the glasses, Charles drinking. Then the vomiting from the bathroom, followed by their argument. "Enough!" Charles slammed his hand on the table. "What is this? Are you trying to disgrace this family?" "I want the truth," Rachel said. "Not for Logan, for me. How? Many years have I lived in the shadows of your lies. It was all for you," Margaret screamed. "Don't you understand? Logan isn't worth throwing your life away for." Jasmine stood up. "Just like I wasn't worthy of Brandon, right?" Brandon lowered his head. "Mom, I believed you. But now, what have you done to the people I care about?" I brought up more emails, testimonies from Rachel's old friends, letters from Andrew Foster. Margaret and Charles grew visibly uneasy. No more sharp comebacks, just two people drowning in a room filled with evidence. Finally, Rachel stood up. Her voice was strangely calm. "I love you both, but what you've done is unforgivable. From now on, I make my own decisions. No one controls me anymore." Brandon nodded. "Same here." Margaret burst into tears, but not from remorse. It was the grief of power crumbling. As we prepared to leave, I placed a USB drive on the table. Inside is everything: videos, emails, testimonies. I haven't sent it to anyone else. But if either of you interfere again, copies will go straight to lawyers, business partners, and every member of your exclusive club. Charles looked at me, and for the first time there was no contempt in his eyes. "I misjudged you," he muttered. I adjusted my camera strap and replied simply, "Yes." "You did." 6 months passed since that day. Life slowly returned to its rhythm, not perfect, but peaceful. Rachel and Brandon started therapy to heal the deep wounds their parents had quietly planted since childhood. Jasmine and I kept in touch more often, not just because of shared pain, but because now we were allies. As for Margaret and Charles, they quietly withdrew. No more calls urging Rachel to come over for dinner. No more snide emails about my career. Just brief holiday messages. "Hope you're well." Nothing else. And I was content with that. Not because I wanted to cut ties, but because they had finally understood. This boundary was permanent. On Thanksgiving, they sent an invitation for a family dinner with the words, "A fresh start." Rachel held the card for a long time, then turned to me. "I want to go." I didn't stop her. As long as we set the conditions. We stayed at a hotel, didn't sleep at their house. We didn't leave Eliza, our daughter, alone with them. No talk of marriage, work, or the future. Just the present. Dinner was strangely peaceful. Margaret smiled more, but without the sarcasm. Charles asked about my work, this time without judgment. After the meal, he invited me into his study and poured me a glass of scotch. "I have a proposal," he said, as if negotiating an investment deal. "I've been thinking, you should consider expanding your career. I could bring you into My investment firm. Executive assistant role. Good salary. Stability. I held the glass, didn't drink. Why? Your family, he said, eyes steady. And I respect how you handled everything. You protected Rachel. You didn't. Break this family. That's what a man should do. I set the glass down, still untouched. I know this isn't an invitation. It's another test, another form of control. And my answer is no. Charles sighed. Don't be foolish, Logan. Everyone has a price. Smiled. And that's exactly why you'll never truly understand your daughter. When I returned to the living room, Rachel was looking through a childhood photo album Margaret had brought out. When our eyes met, she knew. Once again, Charles Holloway had tried to assert control. And once again, he had failed. Rachel stood up, voice clear. Mom, Dad, I have something to say. Everyone looked up. I'm pregnant. Logan and I are having another child. Silence, lingering. Then Margaret stood up, embracing Rachel, tears falling. My daughter, she whispered. Oh, that's wonderful. Charles came next, slower. He extended his hand to me. Congratulations. I shook it gently. This child will never be part of any of your games, I said softly, just loud enough for him to hear. I promise you that. His face remained expressionless, but I knew he understood. 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived at our home. It came from Charles's lawyer. Inside was the deed transfer of the house we had been renting, now legally ours. Along with it were documents for a trust fund set up for Eliza and the unborn child. No conditions, no messages, no strings attached, not an apology. Charles Holloway wasn't someone who knew how to say sorry, but it was a quiet surrender, perhaps the only kind he was capable of offering. That summer, we welcomed baby Eleanor, named after my grandmother, a woman who never feared the truth. Margaret and Charles came to the hospital. They brought flowers, gifts, and an appropriately reserved attitude. No parenting advice, no judgments about our lives. They held Eleanor for a few minutes, took a photo, and left after wishing us a good night's rest. Life is no fairy tale. They didn't magically become loving grandparents or understanding parents, but they stopped interfering. And sometimes, as Rachel said, enough is enough. One early spring evening, I was editing photos in my studio when Rachel walked in, holding a sleeping Eleanor. Mom called, she said. Asked if we'd come to Cherry Hills for Christmas this year. I put the camera down. What do you think? Rachel sat beside me. I think if we go, it'll be on our terms. Hotel stay. We leave when we choose, and no one gets time alone with Eleanor. I nodded. Sounds fair. She smiled. I used to think success was making my parents proud, getting their approval, hearing their praise. But now, she looked down at our daughter, then at me. Now I think success is living beside the people you can trust, standing tall, even if no one stands with you, loving, without fear of control. I didn't answer, just took her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. 2 weeks later, I received a package from Charles's firm. Inside was their annual report, featuring my photographs on the cover, mountain sunsets, executive portraits, architectural shots. Along with it was a handwritten note. Hired the best photographer I know, figured you should have a copy. Not reconciliation, not gratitude, just respect. And for me, that was enough. The following autumn, I opened my first photography gallery in downtown Boulder. Images I had taken deep in the woods, in the snow, and in the quietest moments of everyday life, all hung proudly on the walls, bathed in warm light. Rachel stood beside me, holding Eleanor. My parents flew in from Oregon. Friends, clients, locals, everyone came to show support. And then Margaret and Charles arrived. They didn't stay long. Margaret held Eleanor for a while. Charles shook my hand and quietly nodded as he looked at the photos. No critiques, no smug looks, just silent acknowledgement. As we locked the gallery doors that night, Rachel asked, "Do you think they've changed?" I paused for a moment, then shook my head. "No," I said, "but they've realized they can't change us, and sometimes that's enough."